Hello everyone, how are you doing today? So many bad news everywhere. Well, this is not going to be a video about bad news because I think we're all feeling a little bit disheartened. Everything seems to be bad news. I made an attempt, flimsy as it was in the last video, faith, family, and flag, to show you two little kiddies dancing and so on. Only because the power of what I meant to say was the power of community, and when people know their roots and so on. Well, you know the meaning of it. The traditional dances, the folklore dances, are normally to celebrate good news, the harvest, when everyone is happy, in traditional peasant agricultural societies. Life was hard, and so there was one time in the year, apart from weddings and all that, the whole community would come together and celebrate, and they sang together and they danced together. And those dances are mainly about celebrating the harvest and so on, but many of them are about courting. Yes, the male, and the man and the woman sort of courting and coming together and then going apart, and the male insisting and the female desisting, and and the male again persisting and the female I'm running out of words now. The female coming round and assisting in the whole thing. Okay, so then they come together and they get married and live happily ever after and so on. But it's a sense of community when everyone shares in the common good. We are missing that today, aren't we? And we feel isolated, and we feel lonely, and we feel what has happened in the last 4 or 5 years. Goodness gracious, it's like, we got a what they calling war, the what do they call it, shock and awe, something, when everything comes so powerfully all at the same time and everything gets destroyed. And I think it has happened to all of us, that we got a concussion and we're still sort of coming out of it, and we don't quite know yet how to react. We are in a stupor. Things happen that we just cannot comprehend nowadays how it was possible for them to happen. If you look at the old videos of the virus and so on, how did that happen, and how governments reacted in this way, and how did we react in this way? It really took us all by surprise. And well, there are suggestions. Have you heard? Got it written down here, his name, because I didn't quite remember it. Was it in the 70s? There was a Russian, in those days the Soviet spy, who defected to the United States, and his name was Yuri Vesmenov. I didn't know of him, but there are all of a sudden lots of videos of him on internet talking about how to disrupt society and what the Soviets had in mind, and so on. Although there are, and he has a theory, and he does explain it. There are some who say, well, yes, but it's not so much the Soviet Union. Really, you can apply this to the Frankfurt School, which intellectuals who came from Germany with their own Marxist or left-wing ideas, and they proceeded in the same way. But if you can find it somewhere, it's there. But he had four main points as to how to destroy a society or an organization or a church from within. And he mentions first demoralization. When you're struck on the face, as it were, so hard that you don't even know how to react, and then you don't see any possibilities of reacting, and so you withdraw because you see that there is no, you are between a rock and a hard place. No one, the government, all the organizations they seem to be against you. It seems as if there is nothing you can do, and then this process of demoralization begins. There is nothing you can do. Whatever you do, they are in power, they are going to do whatever they want, and so on. I think this process is happening at the moment. We just don't seem how to be able to go back to how we were, in which, a period when, well, at least in theory, we could elect people and they were responsible and accountable to us, and it just doesn't seem like that anymore. It seems as if they're saying, I said this in so many videos, yes, I'm lying to you, so what? What are you going to do about it? And the fact is that you can't do anything about it because they seem to be everywhere. This sounds conspiratorial, but I think a lot of us feel that way. So once you begin to think there is nothing I can do really, that process of demoralization has begun, which is essential. And then once the people, the second stage, he calls it destabilization, and that is when people in power, those who know what they're doing, the rest of the population is just sort of going along with everything, because you don't expect your government to be actively acting against the citizens. It's just too much to take in. Well, then they proceed to break down society. Yes, so destabilization can happen in many ways, but one of the ways is to divide society into groups fighting one another. Okay, so if the fault line, I have referred to this in many videos, if the fault line is language, you proceed to put one group against the other, or religion or race or whatever it might be. Okay, so the society divide and conquer, basically. Okay, so different societal groups are fighting within themselves, and those in power, we are the puppets, the puppeteers know what they're doing. And he spoke very eloquently about this, and this is a formula that they have studied. And from there, you have the third stage, and he calls it the crisis. And that is when an active war, being hot or cold, starts. I think that... Am I exaggerating if I think that we are also at that stage? I don't mean the war between Ukraine and Russia. I mean, within our own societies, is there a war going on? And after this division and this crisis is there in society, then there is a process of normalization. In other words, what Lenin used to say, 2 steps forward and 1 back. Okay, so you go with all these strange theories and strange everything, and you say, what? What are you talking about? And then they retreat a little bit, so that a process of normalization begins, in that you will not accept that extreme position, because that's nonsense. How can you possibly think that? But you begin to think that perhaps there is something to it, and we can see it in many social policies. Yes, they go for the whole thing. That is not accepted. you retreat, they retreat, but we have come to understand that this is now in the normal public square, as it were, for us to debate, and that is how it is advanced. Anyway, if you can watch some of those videos, I mean, they're very old, they're from the 70s, but for theory of how to destabilize society, you might find them interesting. I have seen two videos recently that I want to comment on. One is from Dr. Ashenden. I have actually referred him to you. Many of you probably know him much better than I do, but those of you who don't or who see this video for the first time, he's a convert to Catholicism, and he was the former chaplain to the Queen, and before she died, I think it was, I don't want to say exactly because I wasn't following it, but I think it was perhaps 1 or 2 years before she died. It could be more, I don't know. But he resigned and told the Queen that he was going to resign, and anyway, so after a while he became a Roman Catholic. Now, I like listening to him because he's a scholar. He's a very reasonable person. He's not full of antipathy or hatred towards anyone. He's actually rather a kind man, and his videos are rather soothing, I find, sort of a reasonable person talking reasonably about things, but of course so well learned and so well read that you learn from him. Anyway, in one of his last videos, he refers to a letter that he received from a person, so-called Anglo-Catholic, who says, well, what's the point of, coming to the Catholic Church? It's all in flames anyway, so what's the point? It's a good point. And he addresses that, and it is important how he addresses it. He starts by saying that there is a time now for guidance. Let me start with this about Anglo-Catholicism for those perhaps cultural cradle Catholics, or who are not here in England or in the United States, and for them the word cradle Catholic doesn't make any sense. But the Anglo-Catholicism is, if I can tell you how I came to think about it. When I first came to England, this was in 1967, and I was a teenager, and it was a time when women, older women, still wore hats. All the older women wore hats, and there was a store, like a huge department store that had a huge department on these old women's hats, and I, a teenager, used to love going there and try my hats. But at that time, Anglican priests were not called priests, they were called vicars, if I remember. Nor did they wear priestly collars or anything like that. So there's a clear distinction. The Mass was a Catholic thing. They referred to it, if I remember, as the Eucharist. Later I came to, when I went to Spain 50 years later, stayed there for a few years, I realized that something had changed. The Anglicans were actually referring to the Mass, and the people in Spain were talking about the Eucharist. I said, what is happening here? All this changing of of words. But something had happened. But I saw that there was a movement to sort of be more Catholic, and they call it Anglo-Catholic. And I thought, not knowing anything about it, I thought there is no such thing as Anglo-Catholic. You're either Catholic or you're not Catholic. Catholic is not something that was invented in the 11th century after the division, the schism between Greek and Rome, between the East and the West. The fathers, the apostolic fathers, talk about the Catholic Church, okay, meaning, as you know, universal, the universal. Of course, then in the when was it? 1054, there was this division, and Greece and Rome divided up, and so yes, two lungs, one church, I suppose. But at one point, I have read that the Church of England, as it used to be called always, the term Anglican, the first one to use it was, I believe, Saint John Henry Newman. More about him in a second. But the Church of England. Okay, let me deal with that, because I lost my train of thought a little bit with this John Henry Newman. I happened to be here in Oxford, England, and John Henry Newman was, in the 19th century, basically la creme de la creme of Anglicanism, or of English letters at the time. And he used to preach at the University's Church, St. Mary. His sermons were preached there. He started, together with others, he wasn't the only one, he started this so-called Oxford movement. And the meaning was, and Dr Ashenden refers to it as a sort of nostalgia for the sacraments, the Eucharist, the orders, the authority of the Catholic Church, as it were. But John Henry Newman has a sentence that still very anti-Rome. He has a sentence where he says, "You might have us," speaking to Rome, with a little bit of anger, "you might have us one by one, but you will never have us all," the whole of Anglican Church. Anyway, he went through this journey of conversion, and he ultimately became a Catholic, Roman Catholic, and eventually a cardinal too. In Oxford, you can go to Trinity College and see from outside where his room was. Oxford, as opposed to Cambridge, was always more royalist and always more kind of Catholic, if you know, less Calvinist, as it were. I don't know the different denomination, but less, wanted a sort of a halfway, not quite with Rome, but Catholic, but not with Rome kind of thing. Okay, they actually went to the Orthodox Church with the idea of being recognized as a via media, a medium way. In other words, just as the early church, the first 1,000 years, is East and West together, sharing the saints, sharing the councils, sharing the doctrine, and so on. The Anglicans wanted to be accepted as one third church, as it were, the same as Rome and Greece, as it were. And they didn't want to go to Rome, so they went to the east. And the Orthodox Church told them, no, you are under the jurisdiction of Rome. It is with Rome that you have to deal with. John Henry Newman later brought the Oratorian brothers to England. It was he was looking for an order that already existed, but that would give meaning to the English mind, psychic. He thought, for example, in this way, that you could still keep your property, not, the Franciscans renouncing you could keep your property, you could keep your books and so on. He thought that the Oratorians, who had been founded by St. Philip Neri, would be the right order for England. And so we have normally it refers the oratories. Okay, so there is one here in Oxford. Wonderful place, by the way. And I can attend both the old mass and the I don't go to the new mass, but they do say the new mass, and also once a week or twice a week they have the old mass. So what happened to John Henry Newman in his conversion was this. I forget the name of the Italian priest who decided in the 19th century that he would come and convert the English back to Rome. And he was a pint-sized Italian who didn't speak English very well, but he had this ardor and this thing about converting England. He was going to do it, and he was actually quite courageous. He would stand outside pubs preaching. He got his words mixed every now and then because his English was rather poor, and he would say that Jesus came to shave the world. And you can imagine how that went down outside a pub. Okay, so but anyway, he meant well, and he was coming one time to a place near Oxford here, and John Henry Newman, who had already been thinking about converting, he decided that he would go to him to be accepted into the church. And so he did, and it was one day when it was raining, and this Italian father, whose name I don't remember, perhaps some of you can put it in the comments, had been coming from London to Oxford, and it was pouring down with rain on a coach, open coach, and he got absolutely soaking wet. And when he got here, he was actually taking his shoes off, his coat, his shoes, his socks, in order to dry them, when John Henry Newman came in and knelt down and asked to be accepted into the church. If you can imagine la crème de la crème of Anglicanism on his knees to this pint-sized Italian who could hardly speak English anyway, that's quite a picture to have. His conversion was real. He was obviously criticized for it and so on. So I believe that he was the first, or one of the first, to call the Church of England Anglican. And he wrote, of course, extensively then about universities and education and all kinds of things. Okay, so now, in this Church of England, there is this side that call themselves Anglo-Catholics. They don't want to be with Rome. They do have the Eucharist, but they don't believe as Catholic. They believe it's a symbol. Okay. There might be some who believe, as Catholics do, that it is the bread and wine through via transubstantiation become the body and blood of Christ. There might be a few, but I don't think most do. I think most see it as a symbol and with due respect and so on, but as a symbol. But the Church also has many different types of Protestant beliefs. There would be Calvinists there, perhaps Presbyterians. So now all that is within the Anglican Church. Okay, so it is this a person, an Anglo-Catholic, who wants to be sort of perhaps closer to Rome, who says, what's the point? And that is a good question because of what we are going through now. And Dr. Ashenden answers, and I think answers very well. And I'm going to, if I can find it, I will try to find it and see if I can put it there for you. He explains that, look, what is happening in the Anglicans have all these beautiful churches which were Catholic. Their ministers, their vicars now call themselves priests, and they have the priestly robes and so on. So the main thing here is the belief in transubstantiation. He makes the point that, however, there was a break during the Reformation. In other words, the apostolic succession of the bishops was broken. One could argue that Bishop Cranmer and many others, Parker, had been, because they had been Catholics, they had the authority to ordain other priests and so on. But he explains how this is not the case because there was a break, and you have to have, in order to ordain, you also have to have not only the form and so on, but also the intention. And the intention was never to consecrate bishops in the Catholic Church. Anyway, he goes on he gives a long answer to this. And he says, then he gives his reasons why his decision was to come back to the church, and he goes on fully aware of the problems that the church is having now. But nevertheless, he says, yes, one part of it is, of the church is on fire, one side of it is on fire, but there are fire extinguishers in the Catholic Church. It's not the first time that the church is on fire. So he says, basically, after much thought, he wanted to be at the heart of the church that Jesus found, with real sacraments, with real ordination, with real authority, with real episcopal succession, with real successors of Peter, however faulty they are at the moment. My thing is not only with the Pope, it's also with the bishops keeping quiet in this time of need when so much guidance is needed. I'm terribly disappointed, but that's another thing. And he says, basically, he just came to the conclusion that, yes, he should be in the real church that Jesus left. And he says, look, what is happening now is that these private beliefs about Christianity, there is no time for that anymore, because society, and certainly the West, is in a state of real crisis. The woke thing is not, he doesn't say this, I say this, it's not a cult. A cult is, some people refer to it as the woke cult. A cult, you need a charismatic leader, it's a different thing. But of course, in Catholic countries, cult is the ritual. But in English, I know that it's a different thing. So, but it's not a cult. It's actually a new religion, and it is an anti-Christian religion. And he explains, he gives the reason. Watch it. Okay. So we have to try to come together, because that is the battle. The battle is to do away with Christianity altogether. It may sound extreme, it may sound conspiratorial, but just look around you, okay? It started with the attempt to destruct the Catholic Church, then it was the family, then it was feminism, and so on and so on, and everything, one thing led to another. There is no stopping, and the ultimate goal is to do away with the crucified Christ. I have said this many times. That is my intuition. I don't know, I'm just a woman here. I'm not a theologian, but I sense it, as probably many of you do. And he says he has hope, and I do have hope, that the Catholic Church will not be destroyed, that Christ who founded it will not allow it. He may go through different things. My personal opinion is that this particular Pope, call me insane, I don't care, who's trying to destroy the Church. It goes beyond, oh, he's not aware, he might have done this. No, I'm sorry, no. I won't go into that argument. I don't want to upset you. But I have come to the conclusion that he has a clear idea of what he's doing. But I actually think that the next one is perhaps going to be worse, because, as we have said so many times, he has packed the court, 80 cardinals and bishops there of his own ideological persuasion. So what is going to happen there? We don't see a lot of courage among bishops. There are a few, more and more, but most of them are quiet. They were quiet during COVID. They are quiet now when we see that people, children, what is happening to children, and do you hear them? They're afraid. So, worthless, basically. But even with all that, they are the successors of the apostles. And just as I try to convince myself, because I have to hang on to something, just like the apostles run away, during the crucifixion. Not me, no, not me. Me no Alamo, as I said. There might be. Something has to happen. I am actually optimistic. I think that all this is just bringing everything to such a point that something has to give here. Okay, there is no more working in the shadows, manipulating as it has been done up to now, without anyone noticing. Good intentioned bishops at Vatican II signing, oh yes, make it more accessible. That's a good idea, and so on. When others were militant and knowing what they were doing. So I do believe that it's probably a good thing that everything is becoming so apparent. It's like in politics, we were not aware of the depth of the deep state until it was perhaps Trump, actually, that made this, smoked them out. I mean, they hated him so much. Whatever you think of Trump, everyone says that, whatever you think of Trump. No, but it's true. The hatred was so great that they actually came out and they didn't mind being seen now as openly doing this and that. And I think that is happening in the church too. But Dr. Ashenden says he doesn't believe that, of course, the Catholic Church will ultimately be destroyed. I think it will renew itself much more vigorously because of this persecution from within. But he says, were the Catholic Church to succumb to demonic heresies taking place today in Germany and Belgium and Flanders, then there would be nothing left. And that cannot possibly happen. And I said many times, and I think that you probably think but I think the renewal will come from the place where it's this, the place where the anti-Christian forces are most powerful. And I think the renewal of the Catholic Church will come from America. I really do think so. It will not come from Italy, it will not come from Spain, it will not come from France, it will not come from England. It will be from America. I'm fully convinced of it. I won't live to see it, but unfortunately, but there you go. So so the point is that to all non-Catholics who feel that Rome is still your enemy, Jesus was always saying about being one body, in other words, one ecclesial cohesion, being one. And then he deals with obedience. Okay, and for this obedience, I actually saw another video, and which deals with this, the difficulty that we have at the moment with the Vatican and the Pope going in this direction, and whether or not we, because he's the Pope, we have to obey. We Catholics have this thing about obedience. It's in our DNA and so on. And this is a video. It was a talk, a conference on April 21st, 2023 in South Carolina, USA, and it's a talk by Dr. Peter Kwasniewski. Don't know whether I'm pronouncing his word properly. I have seen a few things of him. I didn't know of him at all until, I don't know, a month ago. He might be actually quite well known in America. I have a feeling that he is. But anyway, this talk is about obedience and the common good, and why we should all defend the traditional Latin Mass, in other words, the liturgy of the Church. I know that this is difficult because some sites have now been created, sort of two opposing sides and so on. But for those of you who are young and didn't know the traditional liturgy, you might think that there is no problem with it whatsoever, what you have at the moment. Those of us who were brought up in the traditional liturgy and faith do notice the difference. I have referred to this in other videos. Believe me, there is a difference, okay? The difference being changing doctrine by changing ritual, okay? Too complex for me to go into now. But on this question of obedience, he says, okay, who is in charge and who must obey? And he makes a clear distinction between power and submission and authority and obedience. Okay, so you can see where he's going. Power can be exercised in many ways, and you submit, you obey, but you submit, probably because you don't have any other option. Yes, you may not even respect the person in power. You may even think he's wrong, but but if you don't obey, you're shot, for example, in an extreme case. Okay, so power and submission. But here in the church, we're talking about authority and the common good. The true obedience in the church is that you are due obedience. He goes at great length, so watch it if you can find it. Authority has to be exercised for the common good, not for me or you or this ideology or this particular way of doing things. In this case, for the common good of the church. And he goes at great length explaining why, trying to shut down the liturgy and the doctrine of 2,000 years for this new one is not taking into account the common good. Is trying to exercise your own view of things, which is not the same. So when let me see, because I wrote okay. So what is the common good? The common good is when we all share in something and we are all better for it. For example, if it is a physical thing, a cake, it is good for me. We have a cake, I take one piece, you take another piece, that is good for me and that is good for you. The common good, on the other hand, is, let's say, having just laws or having a strong family unit. In other words, the more you use it, the greater it is and the better it is for everyone. It's not like a piece of cake that you ate your piece and that was good for you. Yes, so the common good, we all share in this, but just the more we share, the better it is. So, yes, the more we share, the more the common good exists. And so he comes to the question of whether, if that authority is not used responsibly, if it is not used for the common good, if it is used for another person, then you, in this case a Catholic, you are not under the constraint of having to obey. You know the old thing about obeying the general who gives you the order to kill children, for example, and you have morally the right to refuse that order. In that case, you have the right to disobey. But in our case, he gives several examples. For example, he mentions one where he says, imagine that your husband or the father of your children comes home every day drunk, in a rage, and so on. Okay, you as the wife, even though you have to respect your husband, you have to, shall I say, obey, but the husband is, and the father is the head of the family traditionally. But in this particular case, no, you have to protect your children, you have to protect your family. Obeying or respecting that person, no, the safety of the family, of the common good comes first. He gives other examples. So you see where we are going with this, and that is that sometimes if the authority is abused, but if it is not used for the common good of Catholics in general, you don't have to obey, because it is done, is an abuse. It is done simply for this ideology or this particular way of doing things. And I think we Catholics have to be aware of this. The point of the Catholic faith is not to obey the Pope. The Pope is a man. The Bishop is a man. They might be in the wrong. And so to just say, oh, don't say anything bad against them, okay, we have to obey, that is not Catholic, actually. So I'm going to leave you with this. I think I have gone on for a little bit, but I'm going to end with this because I'm so tired of bad news. What with the war and everything, oh my goodness, have you seen the latest? Never mind. So what I'm going to do is just to cheer you up a little bit, and I'm going to put another dance for you, okay? And this is no, it's not a dance. I'm going to put some people singing. Okay, so I gave you, the previous one was the two little kitties, okay, which were cute. These ones are from another part of Spain, not Aragon, but Galicia, where I'm from, northwest, yeah, where Compostela, Camino de Santiago is and all that. And we are Celts, and we use the bagpipes. And it's very similar to Irish, but except that we dance in a different way. But anyway, in this particular case, talking about community, that's my point. In this particular case, it's not two little kiddies. It's a bunch of old guys, old guys, okay, who were friends in the same village. They knew each other. Some of them are brothers, some of them are cousins. There are about 10 of them. And in the taverns, okay, they would, which is the equivalent of the pub in England, is where people get together. You go there, you have a glass of wine with your mates and so on. And they started singing. But they actually sung quite well. And this is about quite a few years ago, 25 years ago, that they got together and they decided to actually practice because they sounded quite good, you know. So they would practice, and once a week they would gather in this place, and the sole purpose was to sing, but to train how to. Anyway, long story short, they became really famous. They made up their own songs according to traditional ways of writing songs and poems and so on. And they became really famous. And they even have, recordings and things. My point in this is, look what traditional communities being together, sharing one common way of looking at things, how it brings smile. People are happier. when they recognize their own culture there, what they have in common, you will see these guys, old guys, singing, okay? But how people listening to them in one particular fiesta, it was probably the fiesta of the Virgin Mary somewhere, I don't know. But everyone sort of smiling, and people are happy. I think that is, you see them. We are missing that now. We are missing that sense of community because of all the things that are happening in the world right now. We have to find a way. I don't have the answer. We have to find a way to live in communities again. So this is a reminder. This is from about 5 years ago, I don't know. But a reminder of when people live in communities. They smile more. They're happier. Okay, enough for today. Thank you for listening. This was rather long. Subscribe, please. Okay, bye-bye.